Steve, describe a little bit about your relationship with him in terms of how it began, in terms, when were you aware of the amount of support that he was giving your film Hoop Dreams? Because that was so seminal on so many levels, I'm sure, obviously to your career, but in terms of what we as, film lovers saw in terms of what the power of a film critic could be in terms of really changing the fate of a movie.
Well, yeah, I mean, the film had been accepted to Sundance, and John Iltis, who represented the film, he'd never done this before, to try and sell it. He was going to try to sell it to Sundance. He had this brilliant idea, which was because his day job was to do PR for mostly Hollywood movies that would come to town. He was the Chicago kind of PR person for the studios. He dealt with Roger and Gene all the time. Knew them quite well, of course, and so he convinced them to go watch this 3-hour documentary about these kids nobody had ever heard of, and a film that was only going to be at Sundance, and they were willing to go watch it. And then they decided they were going to review it on their show while the film was at Sundance. So when we heard that they were going to review it, we knew they must have really liked it.
And let's just give a little perspective here in terms of what Sundance, it's like Sundance now has that word has a lot of resonance now. I think when at the time when Hoop Dreams was there, Sundance was like, son what? It's like, I don't think it had the same meaning that it does now.
Not in the culture, but in the industry, it was really taking off, obviously. And so that was a game changer right there for that film, being what it was, and it led to distributors who we had sent the film to in advance of Sundance once we got in, saying, hey, we're going to be in Sundance, and never hearing a peep from anybody, because it came in on 2 VHS tapes, and they were like, that's interesting. And it led to, having several offers on the film to distribute it. And it really was directly, I like to think the film had something to do with it, but it never would have happened without their championing it like that. And that was just the beginning. They continued to champion the film for the next year and a half. Every chance they got, kind of like what they did for Earl Morris, and his first film. They did that for Hoop Dreams, and it was remarkable. It's arguable I wouldn't have much of a career if not for them.
I wanted to just correct one thing you were saying about Roger and Steve, the kind of knowing each other and the relationship. Even though Roger did champion Hoop Dreams and Steve also lived in Chicago, we would see him in over 20 years, maybe more than a handful of times, but
probably less than a dozen.
Less than a dozen, and it was never social in the sense that they never had a meal together. They never had a cup of coffee together. Steve would see us at some event, and he would come and say hello, and then he would kind of scurry away because he said he was respecting the wall between the filmmaker and the film critic. He didn't know that there were some other filmmakers who had a more cordial relationship. But I think it helped the filmmaking because I noticed that because there were lots of things for Steve to discover, the way he built the film was letting you discover with him. And so I think that distance ended up making a better film.
Absolutely, yeah. When I read the memoir and saw that he'd had a kind of close relationship with just a few filmmakers, and most of the ones that even qualified as that are actually in the movie. There aren't many others, maybe. But anyway, I remember my first thought was, gee, why not me? I live in Chicago even. It'd be real easy with me. But once I started making the movie, just what Chaz said, I think is absolutely right. And I think it also allowed me a certain kind of ability to try and present Roger. I would not have done the film if I'd read the memoir and didn't like him, like suddenly decided, ooh, I don't know if I like this guy. I would not have done the film because Roger had done too much for me to do that. What, I'm going to do a takedown on Roger Ebert or something? I don't know how you would do that anyway. But you know, from the start, this was going to be an admiring portrait ultimately, but I also felt a need, just like he did in the memoir, for it to be well-rounded and hopefully show, get your, you know, a sense of the fullness of him. And because he was, you know, he was a multifaceted human being.